4. So this is the real Ralph Ailewan. The naked reality, a partial corpse not even decently underground. The other Ralph Ailewan has gone, disappeared, like yesterday, like the first day in the history of man, like Nebewia's love or Eilish's loyalty. I must not be deceived by appearances. His kind words are cunning, his smiles no more than a curl of the lips, his generosity a defensive flick of the fingers, and only a sense of guilt moved him to let me cross the threshold of his house. You made me, and now you reject me. Your ideas create their embodiment in my person, and then you simply change them, leaving me lost, rootless, worthless, without hope. A betrayal so vile that if the whole Mukatan hill toppled over and buried it, I would still not be satisfied. I wonder if you'll ever admit, even to yourself, that you betrayed me. Maybe you've deceived yourself as much as you try to deceive others. Hasn't your conscience bothered you even in the dark? I wish I could penetrate your soul as easily as I've penetrated your house, that house of mirrors and objets d'art, but I suppose I'd find nothing but betrayal there. Nebewia is disguised as Ralph, Ralph disguised as Nebewia, or Eilish Sidra in place of both. And betrayal would cry out to me that it was the lowest crime on earth. Their eyes behind my back must have traded anxious looks throbbing with lust, which carried them in a current crawling like death, like a cat creeping on its belly toward a bewildered sparrow. When their chance came, the last remnants of decency and indecision disappeared, so that in a corner of the lane, even in my own house, Eilish Sidra finally said, "I'll tell the police. We'll get rid of him." And the child's mother was silent. The tongue of that so often and so profusely told me, "I love you, the best man in the world," was silent. And I found myself surrounded by police in Al-Sarafi Lane, though until then demons themselves with all their wiles had failed to trap me, their kicks and punches raining down on me. You're just the same, Ralph. I don't know which of you is the most treacherous, except that your guilt is greater because of your intelligence and the past association between us. You pushed me into jail while you leapt free into that palace of lights and mirrors. You've forgotten your wise sayings about palaces and hovels, haven't you? I will never forget. At the Abbas Bridge, sitting on a stone bench, he became aware for the first time of where he was. "It's best to do it now," he said in a loud voice, as if addressing the dark, "before he's had time to get over the shock." I can't hold back, he thought. My profession will always be mine, a just and legitimate trade, especially when it's directed against its own philosopher. There'll be space enough in the world to hide after I've punished the bastards. If I could live without a past, ignoring Nebewia, Eilish, and Ralph, I'd be relieved of a great weight, a burden. I'd feel readier to secure an easy life and a lot further from the rope. But unless I settle my account with them, life will have no taste, because I shall not forget the past. For the simple reason that in my mind it's not a past, but the here and now. Tonight's adventure will be the best beginning for my program of action, and it'll be a rich venture indeed. The Nile flowed in black waves, slashed sidelong by arrows of light from the reflected street lamps along its banks. The silence was soothing and total. At the approach of dawn, as the stars grew closer to earth, Said rose from his seat, stretched, and began to walk slowly back along the bank toward the place from which he'd come, avoiding the few still-lit lamps, slowing his steps even more when the house came in sight. Examining the streets, the terrain, the walls of the big houses as well as the riverbank, his eyes finally came to rest on the sleeping villa, guarded on all sides by trees like ghostly figures, where treachery dozed in a fine, unmerited tranquility. It's going to be a rich venture indeed, and one to give an emphatic reply to the treachery of a lifetime. He crossed the street casually, without a movement to either right or left, without looking wary. Then followed the hedge down the side street, scanning carefully ahead. When he was sure the street was empty, he dodged into the hedge, forcing his way amidst the jasmine and violets, and stood motionless. If there was a dog in the house, other than its owner, of course, it would now fill the universe with barking. but not a whisper came out of the silence. Ralph, your pupil is coming to relieve you of a few worldly goods. He climbed the hedge nimbly, his expert limbs agile as an ape's, undeterred by the thick intertwining branches, the heavy foliage and flowers. Gripping the railings, he heaved his body up over the sharp-pointed spikes, then lowered himself until his legs caught the branches inside the garden. Here he clung for a while, regaining his breath, studying the terrain, a jungle of bushes, trees, and dark shadows. I'll have to climb up to the roof and find a way to get in and down. I have no tools, no flashlight, no good knowledge of the house. Nebeweah hasn't been here before me pretending to work as a washerwoman or a maid. She's busy now with Eilish Cedra. Scowling in the dark, trying to chase these thoughts from his mind, he dropped lightly to the ground. Crawling up to the villa on all fours, he felt his way along a wall until he found a drain pipe. Then, gripping it like an acrobat, he began to climb toward the roof. Partway up, he spotted an open window just out of reach and decided to try it. He steered one foot to the window ledge and shifted his hands, one at a time, to grip a cornice. Finally, when he could stand with his whole weight, he slid inside, finding himself in what he guessed was the kitchen. The dense darkness was disturbing, and he groped for the door. The darkness would be even thicker inside, but where else could he find Ralph's wallet or some of his objets d'art? He had to go on. Slipping through the door, feeling along the wall with his hands, he covered a considerable distance, almost deterred by the darkness, when he felt a slight draught touch his face. Wondering where it could come from, he turned a corner and crept along the smooth wall, his arms stretched out, feeling ahead with his fingers. Suddenly, they brushed some dangling beads, which rustled slightly as he touched them, making him start. A curtain. He must now be near his goal. He thought of the box of matches in his pocket, but instead of reaching for it, he made a quiet little opening for himself in the hanging beads and slipped through, bringing the curtain back into position behind him, slowly to avoid making any sound. He took one step forward and bumped some object, perhaps a chair, which he edged away from, raising his head to look for a nightlight. All he could see was a darkness that weighed down upon him like a nightmare. For a moment he thought again of lighting a match. Suddenly he was assailed by light. It shone all around him, so powerful that it struck him with the force of a blow, making him shut his eyes. When he opened them again, Ralph Aylwan was standing only a couple yards from him, wearing a long dressing gown, which made him look like a giant, one hand tensed in a pocket, as if he was clutching a weapon. The cold look in his eyes, his tightly closed lips, chilled Saeed to the core. Nothing but deep hatred. Hostility. The silence was suffocating, claustrophobic, denser than the walls of a prison. Abd Rabba the jailer would be jeering. Back already? Should we call the police? Someone behind him said curtly. Saeed turned around and saw 3 servants standing in a row. Wait outside, said Ralph, breaking the silence. As the door opened and closed, Saeed observed that it was made of a wood in arabesque designs, its upper panel inlaid with an inscription, probably a proverb or a Quranic verse. He turned to face Ralph. It was idiotic of you to try your tricks on me. I know you. I can read you like an open book. Speechless, helpless, and resigned. Still recovering from the shock of surprise, Saeed had nevertheless an instinctive sense that he would not be handed back to the custody from which he'd been set free the day before. I've been waiting for you, fully prepared. In fact, I even drew up your plan of action. I'd hoped my expectation would be disappointed. But evidently, no mistrust in you can prove groundless. Saeed lowered his eyes for a moment and then became aware of the patterned parquet beneath the wax on the floor. Then he looked up, saying nothing. It's no use. You'll always be worthless, and you'll die a worthless death. The best thing I can do now is hand you over to the police. Saeed blinked, gulped, and lowered his eyes again. What have you come for? Ralph demanded angrily. You treat me as an enemy. You've forgotten my kindness, my charity. You feel nothing but malice and envy. I know your thoughts as clearly as I know your actions. His eyes still wandering over the floor, Saeed muttered, I feel dizzy. peculiar. It's been like that ever since I got out of jail. Liar. Don't try to deceive me. You thought I'd become one of the rich I used to attack. And with that in mind, you wish to treat me. It's not true. Then why did you break into my house? Why do you want to rob me? I don't know, Saeed said after a moment's hesitation. I'm not in my proper state of mind, but you don't believe me. Of course I don't. I know you're lying. My good advice didn't persuade you. Your envy and arrogance were aroused, so you rushed in headlong as always, like a madman. Suit yourself. Do what you like, but you find yourself in jail again. Please forgive me. My mind's the way it was in prison, the way it was even before that. There's no forgiving you. I can read your thoughts, everything that passes through your mind. I can see exactly what you think of me, and now it's time I delivered you to the police. Please don't. No? Don't you deserve it? Yes, I do, but please don't. If I set eyes on you again, Rauf bellowed, I'll squash you like an insect. Thus dismissed, Saeed was about to make a quick exit, but Rauf stopped him with a shout. Give me back the money. Frozen for a second, Saeed slipped his hand into his pocket and brought out the 2 banknotes. Rauf took them and said, Don't ever show me your face again. Saeed walked back to the banks of the Nile, hardly believing his escape. Though relief was spoiled by a sense of defeat, and now in the damp breath of early daybreak, he wondered how he could have failed to take careful note of the room where he'd been caught, how all he'd noticed had been the decorated floor and its waxed parquet. But the dawn shed dewy compassion, giving momentary solace for the loss of everything, even the 2 banknotes, and he surrendered to it. Raising his head to the sky, he